Let's give a big startup grind welcome for Bret Taylor. Let's hear it.
Sorry for walking early. I'm not very good with instructions. It's gonna ruin the whole thing.
You were very early.
Yeah,
you
good.
were good. Thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So I just sort of went through some of your biography and all the different things you've done. The first question I have, it's kind of serious, but how disappointed are your parents in all the poor choices you've made throughout your career? Are they just...
Actually, I've had a number of hard conversations with my parents about my career choices.
Is that true?
Yeah. Like, being the CTO of Facebook's like a pretty good gig. You know, like the title sounds fancy. You know, any chief is good. And, you know, it's a public company, probably one of the bigger ones in the world. And when I quit, and, you know, I told my dad, and he asked what you were doing. I'm like, I'm making this product. I think there's this vision for future productivity. And he's like, so you quit your job at one of the best companies in the world to compete against two of the biggest companies in the world? You're an idiot. And so, yeah, but I've proven him wrong a couple of times. So now he just doesn't comment on
They have to support you at some point,
Yeah.
right? They must. I mean, that's like one conversation.
Support is overstating. I mean, I love my parents. It's more like disbelief. Like, they're like, oh, he's at it again. You know, it's sort of like, yeah, so I don't think they really get it. But it's a little bit irrational, I think, as most people in the room know who start a company. I mean, it's not usually like the best career choice to make because you're just putting yourself out there to fail. And, you know, when with so many other jobs, you have these support networks around you that can kind of gloss over the mistakes you make. And, you know, it's at every big company, it's like every failed product launch is someone else's fault, you know? And when it's your company, it's like, well, that was my fault. And so it is a little bit irrational. There's something I think drives most of the folks in this room who've gone down that path that's like deeply personal, I guess, as opposed to rational.
What do you see yourself as? Do you see yourself as a CEO, as a CTO, as an engineer, as a founder, what are you like? When you look in the mirror, you're like, there's a what? What is that?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that question, to be perfectly honest. I think I was always, I started my career, I was, you know, in computer science. I was in the middle of my college career, the dot-com bubble burst. So it was really interesting, like, you know, you walk out of Stanford Computer Science at the beginning of my time there, and there's like internships falling from the sky. And then, you know, afterwards it was like tumbleweed. And I ended up switching to product management from being an engineer almost arbitrarily. Like the company I was working at was just like imploding like every company was at the time. And Marissa Meyer, who I knew from Stanford, was at Google and said, we're starting this program for hire product manager straight out of college. Do you want to do it? And I had no idea what a product manager was. And I was like, yes, I absolutely want to do that thing that's not at the current company I'm at right now. And it was really lucky and dumb luck and all these things. And it sort of started this path where I was always like a square peg in a round hole. You know, I was a PM who coded a lot. I was an engineer who loved using Photoshop. And then running a company, you end up wearing a lot of hats. And so I don't really know what my identity is. I think I identify with like leading projects, I guess. I actually feel very comfortable wearing a lot of different hats. I sort of enjoy jobs that require that more than anything else.
Well, you grew up here in Oakland, in the Bay Area. So there wasn't this from the beginning, this mindset of, hey, I'm gonna go down Sand Hill Road, raise money, become an entrepreneur. This was something that's you feel like you sort of stumbled into along the way?
Yeah, no, I went into college wanting, assuming I would be a history major, and the job I had this summer before college was at a 76 station, and it was a full-service 76 station, so you pump gas, I changed oil a couple times. The unique characteristic of the 76 station, though, was right off the freeway, and one of my jobs was to clean the bathrooms, and let's just say it was not the best job I've ever had. And it was interesting because like I was being paid $4.25 an hour for it, which was minimum wage.
When was this? Like in the 70s or something?
No, it was 1998.
Okay.
Yeah, minimum wage was pretty low back then. And I ended up by chance the gas station needed a website, so I taught myself HTML and
Oh,
JavaScript and
wow.
offered my services. And I got paid like a couple $100 for that, which I don't think the guy who ran the gas station was smart enough to realize it was like my entire summer's wages in one website. And I'm like, I quit.
More of that. More of that.
I walked from door to door in my town and just ended up making web pages for flower shops and mechanics. And,
Really?
It was weird though, because I don't really think I thought of it as like a career. It was almost like a vocation. I associate with like the 76 job. It was like, this is just how I'm earning money so I can go study history. And then I got to Stanford and took a computer science class from a professor named Eric Roberts, who retired a few years ago, who taught a lot of the introductory classes, and I like fell in love. I was like, that history thing's gone. I minored in history, but I just fell in love with computer science.
So what was the business called? Did you have a name, the website?
There's a
building?
name. We're not going to go
You don't
into
want
that.
to say
Yeah,
that?
that sounds
Okay.
embarrassing. It's all good. Actually, remarkably though, one of the, I'll see if it's still up.
I mean, the
don't know
name
the
would be
name, but
interesting to know.
One of the websites for a mechanic in Walnut Creek, California, was up more than 2 decades after I made it. Because
Wow.
it turns out, he was like, yeah, the website's fine.
It
Yeah,
worked.
it's done. So
It was good
it's like,
code.
It works.
It was good.
Still works. So it was remarkable though, like possibly my greatest legacy is that mechanics website.
That's awesome. How did you work on so many things at Google? Like, how you go into an organization like that? I started at a big company. I was at Electronic Arts. Like, you come into an organization like that. How you seem to be successful very quickly. How did you navigate getting through there and actually like having an impact, and even such a big place, much smaller than it is now? But
yeah, I don't know where the 25 came from, but it was a lot of launches. Certainly not a lot of products. You know, I started off on search. I think there was only about 4 consumer product managers when I arrived.
Wow.
That was possibly the reason. It was like no one left. So like, yeah, you could do it. There wasn't a lot of products at Google at the time. So there was Google Search, Google Image Search, and Google News. And a product called Google Groups was a search over Usenet at the time. They hadn't even launched the current version. I arrived in 2002, 2003, and then in the tail end of 2003, there was just this explosion internally of a lot of experimental projects. So Paul Buchheit was working on Gmail. We started an initiative to work on local search, which is the project that Marissa assigned me to, from which Google Maps eventually came. And it was a really fun time. It was sort of let 1,000 flowers bloom, and they actually cultivated these flowers. It's a really good, the metaphor is going too far. But it was a really fun time. People were just really exploring the limits of the web browser. My co-founder of Quip, Kevin Gibbs, did this product called Google Suggest, which was, I think, the first type ahead, in a web browser, which at the time was like mind-blowing technology. And if you just walked around that building, there was just people doing things with browsers you just had never seen before. So as a technologist and a product person, it was just so much fun.
best place to be at that time.
Yeah, it was amazing.
Yeah. Can you tell us just a little bit of how Google Maps came about, and tell just a little bit of that story?
Yeah, sure. So Google Maps was like the third product in a sequence of 3 around local search and mapping that I worked on. The first one was a horrible failure. It was called Search by Location, and essentially it was weird. You sort of start with the technology you have. So we had this thought. At the time, Yahoo Yellow Pages was like the premier local search product, and we had this insight. It would be really cool to see all the reviews for these restaurants, and they're all over the internet. So we found addresses and web pages, and then we made a search product where you could type in a keyword and a zip code or an address and say, show me web pages that both match this keyword and mention an address around this location. It sounded very good, sort of in principle, but in practice it would do things like, at the time, Sun Microsystems had a programming language called Java. So if you search for coffee near Menlo Park, it would show all the Sun Microsystems web pages because they put their address at the bottom of every web page. And so there were very few searches you could type into this product that returned anything of value. But we launched it because that's how we rolled at Google at the time. And it was like, it was not successful, let's put it that way. And so we launched another version of local search called Google Local that was middling. It was I think we sort of combined that data from that failed project with sort of a more traditional local search interface. And it worked. We got sort of a third place in sort of in the market for local search, and we were licensing maps from MapQuest at the time. And Larry, in one of my product reviews, Larry Page, in a very direct way that I don't think I can repeat in this room, said that he was displeased with the quality of the maps. Slightly harsher language than that. And so we went out and just had a brainstorm. We ended up finding two engineers named Lars and Jens Rasmussen who were working on a startup that was having trouble getting funding that was making Windows software for mapping. Not a great business model to make Windows software even back then. So they couldn't get funding, and we convinced them to join Google. And over a weekend, Lars, Jens, me, a couple other people, we just basically ported a lot of that technology into the web browser. And it was like this mind-blowing moment where, like, to get it working, and where you could have draggable maps and all that. And so very quickly we realized how cool it was.
Yeah.
And I just stopped working on Google Local, and we had a team of about 7 or 8 of us at the end of it that launched it in February 2005. It's a very organic process.
Well, and that's one of the things I was going to ask you about is, like, you have this product that, okay, we look back on it more than 10 years later, we see, wow, what an impact it's had. But as you're building it, in the midst of it, could you tell at that time, did you have any idea how big it really was going to be prior to doing that port over? Or was it, and even when that happened, could you still have imagined how big of an impact it would have?
Yes and no. Whoa, did that get louder? Just me? No, we're good? Great. So, when we made, for a while, we were just solving technology problems, which is, can we get this piece of Windows software and all of the interactions that previously had not existed in a browser, could we get that working? This is before, like, the term Ajax had been coined. We were opening up Firefox and, debuggers because we were crashing it. It was really, really cutting edge at the time. And once we got it working, it took us like a few days to kind of like absorb what we had done. And to use something so interactive, it really felt like an application versus a web page. We definitely felt like this is going to be huge. We were just like giddy with excitement. We'd go around building, showing it to everybody, and like dragging Sergey down there.
Larry was much happier at this point, or?
Yeah, and he rarely was happy with me, but it's just not his MO. But the interesting thing was that what's so cool about Google Maps is, like, I had a small part in, like, the place that it is now. Like, I definitely, with that team, Lars, Jens, and I all launched it. But since then, they added Street View. The team worked to get it on the iPhone, and it really, like, was one of the flagship apps of the iPhone. I had nothing to do with that. So actually, it's interesting as, like, a builder of companies now. What I am almost as proud of is, like, the legacy, like, this product endured beyond my presence. It's like we created something that there's been some amazing leadership. We acquired a company called Keyhole that turned into Google Earth. Those leaders came on and led that project to new levels. Now there's an entire building, I think, on Google's campus with Google Maps, and that's cool. I mean, it's really neat to see your products have a lifespan beyond yours, and that's really rewarding.
And we'll stop talking about Google here. I want to get to Quip, but you won the Founders Award while you were there. I was just wondering, what does that entail? Do you get, like, Larry's Ferrari for the weekend, or, like, how does that, if you win the award?
A white lab coat with a Google logo.
Is that really?
No, there's some stock involved too.
Okay.
Yeah, and a lab coat.
You leave Google, you start FriendFeed. Like, this seems like another sort of crazy thing to do because you seem to be doing pretty well at Google, to say it mildly. What problem were you trying to solve with FriendFeed?
Yeah, so it was a really interesting time in the internet, and I think where Google's sort of defined itself by indexing all the content on the web and providing information retrieval services on top of that. We didn't really have many places at Google where you actually type something into a text box or actually gave information back. It was really a retrieval system. There was a whole movement of companies that eventually became known as Web 2.0, like Wikipedia, like Yelp, like MySpace and Facebook, that were really oriented a little bit less around technology for technology's sake and really oriented around communities and user-generated content and all of that. I had trouble at Google getting people to take that seriously. Really it was sort of like it's way more strategic to index all of that than it is to be the company providing it. There wasn't a lot of people talking about network effects and all the things that we talk a lot about in social software. So I was totally happy at Google. I don't want to overstate it, but I think that I was drawn to that world of building technology for these communities and really wanted to explore that more. And there was really not an appetite to do that within Google. So I ended up leaving with one of my best friends, Jim Norris. And then when we left, we ended up sharing an office with the two creators of Gmail, Paul Buchheit and Sanjeev Singh, who eventually joined us. And then the four of us launched FriendFeed about 6 months later.
One of the most interesting things about FriendFeed was the loyalty that it had amongst the earliest of adopters.
Yeah.
Even I remember
and Turkish people. That's it.
I didn't know that.
Early adopters and Turks. Yeah.
Also a key demographic for technology products. So, I remember people wearing FriendFeed shirts 5, 6, 7 years after, and the product wasn't around really that long, right? And so, how did you?
We're like one of those bands that everyone wants to say they like because it's cool. Yeah, like the Pixies. Totally love the Pixies. Yeah. Anyway, it was interesting. It is easy to joke about. We had, I wasn't joking about the Turkey thing. We were very big among early adopters, Turkey, Iran, and a little bit of Italy. That was it. And then we were blocked in Iran. So then it was just left with the early adopters in Turkey and a little bit of Italy. So, it's funny, but it's also the way a lot of social networks sort of came and went at the time. At the time, there was sort of a balkanization of social networks. Bebo was very popular in the UK. Orkut was very popular in Brazil. And it's just because of network effects. You grow within communities that are very close. The thing that was interesting is we had... it was really interesting. You see this a lot with Facebook today and others, which is you create these social platforms which enables a voice for your users to complain, and we formed a very tight-knit bond with our community. We were very interactive with them, and we invented a lot of things that became mainstream, like the way we did commenting, which was very real-time, ended up making its way to a lot of networks. We invented the like button, which eventually made its way to a lot of networks. And so I think there's a lot of people who really felt like they participated in the creation of this product and felt a lot of emotional ownership over it. And I think it's true, actually. These communities really drive the development of your products, I think, in really meaningful ways. So even after we sold the company to Facebook and all of us moved on, that community thrived there for years. Really surprised me, candidly, even though I obviously hold it near and dear to my heart.
You've spent a lot of time around a lot of interesting people, but just tell us, in closed meetings with Mark Zuckerberg, spending a lot of time with him, what makes him a unique person or makes him thrive where others weren't successful in the same space?
It's interesting. I'm close with Mark, and he was definitely someone I consider a mentor of mine. And the thing that I think is so unique about him is just how long-term he thinks. Everyone says they think long-term. He's always thinking a decade out when you're thinking a year out, and he has a very strategic framework by which he makes product and technology decisions that, especially as an executive who worked for him, I always felt was challenged me in the right kind of ways. He'd always ask me questions and then what would happen, and then what would happen? And you're in the fourth order effects, and you're I can't take it anymore. I don't know. It really challenged me to think more strategically about the decisions that we make in our products. And I think it shows just in the success of that company. They've been very methodical about their growth in a way that I don't think not many companies have been.
Tell us about Quip. What is Quip? What problem is it solving enough to get you to leave, as your dad said, an incredible job at a company that my friends have heard of?
Yeah, it's funny. Getting on an airplane with a Facebook logo, everyone knows what to talk about. It's very different with startups. One of the things that I was responsible for at Facebook was mobile, and maybe it's a theme of my career, we had a few missteps there that then I corrected. But we ended up sort of making making it through that very uncomfortable transition as a company. The context, which I think most of you know, is that Facebook, for a time, we almost exclusively monetized the service through our website. We had text ads on the right-hand side of all the pages. And we made apps for BlackBerry and iPhone and Android. But then the usage of those devices really started to take off and grow exponentially. And we weren't really transitioning our product as quickly as our users were transitioning to those devices. And so it was really impacting our business model. It was impacting, our engineers who didn't necessarily know a lot of those technologies. So the transition as a company was as much cultural as it was technological. And we had to retrain our engineering team. We spent a lot of time dog feeding our own products on mobile. I got rid of my laptop for a long period of time. And I came out of it really, I think, in a deeper, more emotional way, really seeing the impact of mobility on people's usage of technology. In social software and consumer software, it just happens a lot more rapidly. In many parts of the world, people had never seen Facebook on a computer before. It was all smartphones. And, it was really brought home, if it doesn't exist on the phone, it doesn't exist, And when I turned around and saw the software that we used at work, we were an office shop at Facebook, it just felt really antiquated in comparison. There's like a virtual 8.5 by 11 piece of paper with a save button that looks like a floppy disk. And you're like, this is probably not gonna be the state of the art in a decade. So we left and talked about, with the vision, like in a decade, what is collaboration and productivity gonna look like? The more we researched, the more people told us that actually it was less about Office and more about email. That in the modern workplace, people drown in email so much that they end up spending all day in their email inbox and meetings. They end up doing their job in their spare time, like when they get home. And there's a lot of nodding on that one. Yeah, it's sad. And so we end up sort of reframing our thesis around how can we make a way to collaborate that doesn't involve email? That's what we tried to solve with Quip, which is sort of a marriage of a communication product and a productivity tool that hopefully enables people to get work done without email.
I know you have lots of big customers. Facebook's one of your big customers. Are they still customers?
Yes, yeah.
Is that like a deal you did before? Did you like sign the PO on that? Or did you,
yeah, that would have been funny. No, that was actually interesting. They weren't even one of our early customers. We felt they were too big. When we're a startup, we're just going after kind of the early adopters of technology. We were brought in by the Instagram team actually at that company. So at the time, Instagram was initially launching their advertising product, and they were creating a new type of ad, which was a photograph, which was a new ad for both them and also their advertisers and agencies. So they needed to collaborate between sort of the product engineering teams developing it, their salespeople, and then all the agencies and advertisers that were making this new type of ad. And they found Quip, Mike Krieger, their
co-founder,
found us, brought us in, and it was a really successful collaboration. It sort of created moments of collaboration they hadn't really seen between groups that traditionally didn't talk to each other, and then it just kind of went viral at the company, and now we have about 30,000 weekly active users at Facebook.
This is going to sound like a dumb question, but when you read like the story, or somebody that wasn't at Quip at all, as you read like the PR beats over the years as the company progressed, it just looks like one home run after another. I'm
glad that you've forgotten all of our failures. Bless you. Bless you.
I'm an optimist. What can I say?
Good.
Were there moments of doubt, or was it just like...
You're talking about Facebook?
No, not Facebook. I'm talking about a Quip.
Oh, a Quip. Phew. Yeah, that's like... Yeah.
No, did it feel like... I mean, you leave, you raise a bunch of money, you build this product, you have amazing people working on this team, and you get these cool clients, and then a few years later, like, boom, this big thing happens, Salesforce buys you. I know that's a ridiculous way to look at it, but I'm just saying.
It pretty much sums it up. Yeah, just showed up one day.
But do you think I'm like at a loss for words. As an entrepreneur, I have struggled so much, so many times, and I've interviewed so many people that struggled so many times, and I look at this last and I just think, man, that's the one I want to do. Because was it hard? Was it really hard? Was it sort of hard?
It's
Was it
brutally hard. I mean, that's the thing
hard?
is,
Okay.
well, I presume a lot of you are entrepreneurs in the audience. I mean, it's just so grueling. I mean, the hardest part about being an entrepreneur, I think, is the managing your own psychology. It's so hard where I find that when I just take failure very personally when it's my company and my product. And it's so hard not to become dejected with rejection. You're raising money. You get rejected by 75% of the people. It doesn't matter. You only need funding from one of them. But all you remember is the rejections. And, and then you go and you're trying to sell the product and, you get a bunch of no's, or usually it's not even a no. They don't even grace you.
They don't actually
no.
give you an answer.
It's like, just don't return
Let's
your
stay in
emails.
touch.
And that's what you remember. And it's really, I would just say, you didn't ask this question, but I reflect on it because the main thing that I did differently with my second company is I just thought so intentionally about sort of like finding a co-founder that was someone that I knew I could sort of be sort of, I guess, metaphorically married to for a long period of time, that would not only be a partner in business, but sort of like a partner through those struggles. Because it is interesting how much of, the last thing you need is a founding team with drama and all of the drama that's inherent in starting a company. And so my co-founder Kevin and I we spend as much time sort of investing in our relationship as we do in the company, and it's been sort of like the anchor that has sort of like kept us stable through just all the inevitable failures that come with starting a company. The thing that I think that we probably had at Quip that was valuable was sort of grit. Like when something failed, we would diagnose it and move on to the next thing. And we weren't pivoting, we were just like moving forward, but like changing our angle slightly. We were really committed to our mission. We're like, there's just no, the productivity suite was invented in the 80s and it was the killer app for the PC. VisitCalc was the killer app for the PC. MacWrite was introduced on stage with Steve Jobs when the Macintosh was introduced. We knew that there would be a successor to these products in the mobile era. We felt we knew that. We knew as much as an entrepreneur can be committed to a vision. And so when we had the vision and we had the commitment to do it, it was like you're willing to tolerate failure in the middle because it's not like a existential setback. It's it's sort of a tactical setback. And I think that really helps. And we just spent a lot of time basically in the proverbial couch in psychiatry sessions with each other. It's like, it's okay, you're not a failure.
Talking each other out of it.
Yeah, so, and it is crazy. I think people don't talk about it enough because it is so trying. You come home, you just feel dejected and defeated, and it's okay, and everyone does it. And finding a co-founder or a friend that you can talk to about it is super meaningful.
If I could just go back to your comment about taking the failure really personally, because as an entrepreneur, there's this really thin line of like either not taking it personally enough, like screw them, like they don't get it, and then like, oh my gosh, like they don't like my product, like what am I doing? I need to change everything. So like, how do you, like for you, how do you balance those two things to actually like take the good out of the bad things that are happening, use that, not completely lose your vision, but use that data to then help you shift a little bit?
It's a really good question, and I don't think there's a clear answer on that. It is sort of the question. It's like, is our thesis wrong, or is the like tactics we took, were they wrong? And so you'll always have insecurity no matter what method you use. Some of the tactics that we used, for somewhat obvious reasons, we wrote a lot of documents because that's what Quip does. I find writing to be a very clarifying mechanism to test your theories. Because so we would write a letter to our board rather than having a deck for our board, and we'd share it with the whole company. And it was, we'd go over the financials and all the metrics, but we'd also write a letter, like here's what in the past quarter, here's what we did, and here's sort of where we are in our strategy, how we're thinking about things. To actually write that was interesting. We'd often write something that we thought, and then we'd sort of call our own BS. Because when you write it down and you're writing it, and you know it's going to go out to your whole company, and you're like, you have trouble, like, believing what you just wrote.
Right.
You're like, yeah, maybe that's not true anymore. And I find that to be very therapeutic. It's really easy in a PowerPoint deck or in a graph to kind of lie to yourself. And I find that really clarifying, and I think it's why companies like Amazon sort of are very devoted to the craft of writing rather than decks. And so it's arbitrary. I just find tactics like that where you can hold yourself honest and accountable, and do it with your employees and your board members and people who have a vested interest in calling you on your BS if there is some BS in there. And also it creates a culture of transparency, which I think is also really nice.
Yeah. What metrics outside of like we get this much revenue and this, like the normal things, what were like the really specific metrics that were unique or are unique to Quip that you guys tracked over time? Was it number of documents, number of comments? Like what metrics were specific to you guys that were indicators of success?
Yeah, so we experimented a lot of social metrics because we are a collaboration product and we come from social networking. So one of the metrics that we tracked was the ratio of document authors to document readers. And we knew that there was a sustainable ratio. So you would have companies that had a low ratio of authors to readers, and you know that there was like a few influencers at the company using Quip, but most were like skeptical and obligated to use it as opposed to willingly using it. Usually it was like the CEO using it, and like you have one CEO author and like 100 people going, oh, I gotta open this Quip thing again. And so we knew that, and so we used that as a metric for account health, and we know that we had sort of customer success work to do to make that account healthy. We also, one of the interesting things when we were first trying to predict whether companies that were on a trial of Quip would eventually convert into a sale, we thought it would be correlated with like the amount they were using the product, just like minutes on the product or how many documents they wrote, how many messages they sent. And it turned out to be very, very loosely correlated, like barely correlated. And it turned out the main metric was how much time you're in the same document at the same time with other people, like how much you're actually collaborating with other people. And it came to be that like the folks that were using it as essentially as a note-taking replacement, it was less differentiated. There's a billion ways to take notes, but if you're actually collaborating, you're seeing what's magic about the product. So it really reframed the way we thought about our metrics, and we started to do a lot of machine learning that was essentially discovering features that were correlated with a lot of business metrics and using data to inform our intuition, which was sort of new for me. I'd done a lot of machine learning, but not actually feeding that back into our narratives and intuition, which was like an interesting transformation.
Yeah, every company seems to have these unique things that they track, and like, you can look at Facebook. We're talking about Facebook. Oh, how many daily active users, monthly? I mean, those metrics are fine, but like actually the metrics that are important for your business in many ways will probably be unique things to your business, like you at FriendFeed inventing the like button. Like that was probably a really interesting, relevant metric at that time that nobody else had, that was like, hey, we had more likes this week than we had last week. And, and so like it's sort of showing, are you in the details of the weeds? Are people actually using the product, or are they signing up and burning? Or
it is interesting, like, we talk a lot about with onboarding and product development, getting people to that aha moment. I think the biggest challenge is diagnosing for your product in your category, what is that aha moment? And I think the failure I see with some startups is they'll optimize for a metric that roughly correlates to usage, but it's actually only loosely correlated to people actually reaching that moment in the product experience where they're like, I'm committed, to whatever your experience is. And there's that at Facebook and FriendFeed, it was how many connections you made, how many friends or follows. But I think for other services, it's really important to actually hold yourself accountable to have an opinion about the aha moment, verifying it through metrics, verifying it through customer interviews or user studies, depending on whether you're consumer or enterprise, and then working towards metrics that correlate to that, as opposed to just tracking MAU. Because you can find it's very easy to game these broader metrics, and often your business might be less healthy than you think it is if you're not actually driving people towards that unique aha moment that your product has. And that was something I internalized deeply at Facebook and FriendFeed, and we talk a lot about it at Quip.
how do you identify the aha moment?
So I think talking to users and customers is a very good start, and then you have to verify it through data. So it's, you have to start with intuition and then verify your intuition through data. And so does that aha moment, in quantitative terms, correlate to whatever, a conversion, whatever that is in your business. And so I think it's important to have a thesis of why, because you need to have a story that you tell your product managers and your designers and your engineers, like, this is why people use our product. This is what's different about our product. And then make sure your metrics validate that thesis, and then tell that story over and over and over again, because that's what you don't want to lose when you're building a product in a crowded marketplace.
How do you decide what to work on next? And I don't mean at Salesforce specifically, but just in general, like your next project that you're doing, or what is the thought process you go through to actually picking, I'm sure you have lots of ideas, the thing that you're going to do.
So I'm a big believer in platform shifts as drivers of economic value. So, when the internet was invented, a lot of companies that are now some of the biggest companies in the world came to be, like Amazon and Google. When the PC was invented, companies that dominated the mainframe didn't go away, like IBM, but companies like Microsoft and Apple became, very meaningful companies, sort of built around that new platform. And I think that's why, generally speaking, looking for fundamental underlying shifts in platforms is like a very fruitful place to say, okay, when this platform exists, what habits will change? And that's why I think mobile is probably the biggest in recent. I think it will be the biggest for a while. I think artificial intelligence has the capability of doing that. It's just sort of early days, but it changes so many habits that businesses are being created around those platforms that previously weren't possible. And the reason why I think platform shifts are meaningful is it just changes the balance of power between incumbents and startups. It's very hard to compete with Microsoft on PCs because they owned the PC, everything, the entire stack practically. In the age of the smartphone, it was a completely different story, right? Because they don't control the operating system, they don't control the hardware. All of a sudden, you're on slightly more equal footing with these very, very powerful incumbents. And your agility as a startup and your native understanding of the platform can sort of outweigh their strength in finance and employees and all that. So that's usually, like, as a startup, like when you're thinking startup ideas, going to the rising tide that will lift your boat is definitely, I think, a good starting point. It's a very broad direction, but I do think people often choose a niche and don't think through, like, okay, why will this startup succeed versus these incumbents? It's really important to think about that strategically.
Well, it's interesting. It's almost like, as you're talking about with Quip, about the history. It's like your history major, it's your minor. It's working, because you kind of talking about the history of this market and the segment, and how it started, how it came about, and then where is it going. And so that then, okay, you're a startup, you're not anymore, but you're an entrepreneur. You don't have a lot of customer data. You don't have much feedback yet. You have this thesis that you need to prove. And so one thing you can use is you can use history of this market and where things have gone and where it's at today to basically, and telling a very convincing story about this is where it's gone. Just watch the trend line, and here it goes. And then that's where we come in, is right here.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And actually used the word telling a story. I think it's something that I didn't appreciate when I started my first company, was how important storytelling is to being an entrepreneur. You tell a story when you go to raise money. You tell a story when you're trying to convince a very highly paid Google engineer to leave their very highly paid job to come to your high-risk startup. So much of starting a company is getting good at storytelling, and having people internalize that story and be convinced by that story. It doesn't mean you have to be a great speaker. It just means that you really should understand, why does this exist? Why should this exist? Why is it important? And if you can't articulate it, you should figure out how to articulate it, because it will improve your recruiting, it will improve your fundraising. It's also important to know why you exist. That's your North Star, right? Like, that's why you're making the product that you're making. And it's something that I've worked on a lot over the years. And I think recruiting is probably the best way to test that, because it is fundamentally, we're asking another really talented person to take a leap of faith towards something high risk. And that is, it really can make or break a company's success.
How do you have, that's another thing that I think's unique to you to another level, is that you have really unbelievable people that have seemed to work around you throughout your career. How do you convince, or how do you get these kinds of people bought into what you're trying to do? Are you bringing the ideas to them? Are you like, can you talk about your approach with these people when you get with them, maybe more towards the early stage of companies, like when you know somebody like this person's amazing, great cultural fit, I got to get them on board. Facebook's trying to hire them, Salesforce is trying to hire them. How do I convince them to work on this little dumb thing with me?
Yeah, so I think one of the things when we think about recruiting is to think about it the same way you think about your product, which is what is unique about your team and your company and the environment that you're essentially selling to this potential employee. And it really comes down to what makes you unique. So, I think a lot of places sort of say, oh, we got free food and skateboards or whatever, and everyone has free food and skateboards. That's just like, that's apparently comes with the startup package. You just get it, it just shows up. And I think really you should figure out like what's unique about your work environment. And so we're always very intentional about building our culture, and we communicate it through the interview process. So like, just as an example, we felt that we had seen a lot of people become burnt out at a lot of the companies we'd worked at before. People would go through these sprints, kill themselves, end up getting sort of burnt out, and often they would lead to attrition. People just sort of, they can't sustain not having balance in their lives. So we've always had a policy of having really strict work-life balance at Quip. My co-founder and I leave at 5:30 every day. Even if I have work to do, I'll just do it at home so that we don't have like peer pressure for anyone who wants to go home and be with their families. It turned out that like that, not for everyone, but like, a subset of people who had maybe